Hello and welcome guys, my name is Steve and welcome to my channel. If you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe if you aren't already. And I will not make this a super long intro because this is the part 2 of writing that command switch which we began in the previous video. And that's why without super long intros, let's dive into writing that code, into finishing that example. So in the last video, we could say that we set up the ground rules or the ground for the command switch. We created helpers, we created those dummy functions, we created some interfaces and all that stuff, a couple of types around. And also in this video, we're gonna wrap up those commands and we're gonna first start with the create command. Let's fill out, or I should say finish the create command. And after that, we're gonna fill out the rest of the commands because they will pretty much be the same. As you can see at the moment, we simply have a dummy log or a dummy print. So first of all, we need to create a flag set or something which will organize our command into a command and parse flags for that specific command. And you already know what the flag set is from the previous video. If you don't know, make sure to watch the previous video where we talk about flag sets and so much more. So inside this return function, let's simply say create CMD, and this is going to be a flag set. So let's say flag.new flag set. And let's give it a name, and the name is actually going to be the command which we receive as an argument in this function, flag.exit on error. And there you have it, we successfully created this command or a flag set. Now let's take care of the rest of the details. Now we need a couple of flags or arguments for the create command, and not only for the create command. So instead of copy pasting logic around, I suggest instantly to create a helper, not to waste a lot of time, and that helper will take a command as an argument and set those flags on that command. So let's say we already have that helper in place and it's going to return us back three values. Let's say title, message, and duration, and that's going to be something equals to s.reminder flags. And reminder flags is going to receive a command, as I said before. So let's say create command. And now that we don't have this function, let's go ahead and create this helper. So after help, I'm actually going to copy this. I'm going to say reminder flags, and as I was saying, we need a pointer to string, another pointer to string, and a pointer to time.duration. So first of all, let's have some defaults in place. Let's say t, m, and d. It's going to be equals to an empty string, another empty string, and let's say time.duration of 0. So as I was saying, the reminders flag is going to receive a command or a flag set. So let's go ahead and declare that argument. So let's simply say as an argument, we're going to receive f, and it's going to be a pointer to flag.flagset. So let's say something like f.string var. So let's pass in the address of that variable because it requires a pointer. Let's say address of t. So as you can see, it requires a name. Let's say the name is going to be title, and then it requires a default value. So in this case, if nothing is provided, a default would be an empty string. And then it requires a description, just like in the rest of the cases. So let's simply say reminder title. Now I'm simply going to copy this line and paste it around because we want the exact same flag available. However, we want a shorthand, something like T. So let's simply say T. So let's do the exact same thing for message. Let's say message, and this is going to be M, and let's pass in M here and here. And let's say reminder message, reminder message. Then let's do the same exact thing for duration. Let's say duration, and let's give it a shorthand D, reminder duration, reminder duration. Well, let's actually say reminder time because it's a better description, I guess. So let's say reminder time, reminder time. And now to make this helper functional, let's simply return these values, but don't forget that we need to return pointers. So let's say return address of t, address of m, and address of d. Before we pass these values to the HTTP client, we need another two helpers. One that's going to check the minimum numbers of arguments a command has, because os.args doesn't have enough values, which means we could just simply exit right away without even caring to parse the command. So I'm going to copy this signature again, just to save a little bit of time. And I'm simply going to say checkArgs, and yeah, I'm not going to return anything but an error. And as an argument, this function is going to receive the minimum number of arguments. If it doesn't have that minimum number of arguments, it means there's an error. So we're going to return that error. So let's say, for example, min_args, and min_args is going to be an int. So let's say if len of os.args equals free and os.args of index2 equals to help, then we have to return nil because we simply require the help message of that command. And os.args of 2 equals --help, it means we have to return nil. Let's simply say if len of os.args -2 is less than minimum args. So let's first log something out and then return the error. So let's say print incorrect use of %s \n %s space %s, and let's say space --help \n, and provide in the arguments. First argument is going to be os.args of 1, then it's going to be os.args of 0, then it'll be os.args of 1. Then let's quickly return an error. So let's say return error_f. So let's say %s expects at least %d args, and then let's put a comma and say %d provided os.args, meaning this is the command you ran, and then let's say minimum args, and then let's say len of os.args -2. And actually this return needs to be inside this if, so let's place this inside this if, and at the end of the function we simply say return nil. And to make this a little more beautiful, let's simply format this a little bit like that. And let's place it like that. Arguments in one line and the string in another line. Let's simply say this, and let's put these in another line, and there you have it. So inside the create function, let's simply say if, and let's say error as checkArgs, and let's say minimum arguments is going to be free, and let's say error not nil. Let's simply return this error. So if a specific command doesn't have the minimum required number of arguments, in this case the create command doesn't have at least title, message, and duration, it means we cannot create a reminder. It means we simply don't parse any commands, any flags for that command, and we simply exit with an error. So right after the reminder flags helper, let's go ahead and create this helper parseCmd, which is basically going to parse every command that we have defined in the command switch. So I'm simply going to copy this reminder flags helper signature and do it like that, and except here I am simply going to return an error, and I'm going to name this one CMD, and let's call this one parseCmd. Given the OS args, we should parse the flags for a specific command, meaning we have to omit the first and the second arguments of os.args. So I'm simply going to say cmd.parse, and I'm going to do os.args, and I'm going to say index2 upwards. And as you can see, this method of course returns an error. So let's simply capture this error inside a variable called error. Let's simply say if error not nil. It would be nice if we created another helper called wrapError, which simply takes an existing error and wraps it inside another error, or a custom message, I would say, so that it's easy to distinguish that this is an error which happened inside this error. So inside the client directory, let's create another file called client.go. So let's simply say client, and inside the client.go, let's simply say func wrapError, and wrapError is going to receive two arguments. The first one is going to be that custom message which we want to decorate the error with. So let's say custom message, it's going to be a string, and let's say original error, it's going to be an error. Let's say error and return, and let's say error_f, let's say %s, which is going to be the custom message, colon, and the original error, let's say %v, and let's say custom message and original error. So back to our parseCmd helper. If error not nil, it means we got an error, and let's go ahead and wrap this error by using the wrapper which we just created. So let's say return wrapError, let's say could not parse, and let's use something like single quotes, and then here let's use something like cmd.name, and let's use another string and flags. So basically it's gonna say could not parse, for example, create command flags or something like that. Let's also put in the word command right here so that it's clear enough. Let's say command flags. So that is in case we got an error. In case we don't have any error, in order to make this function valid, let's simply say return nil, and we have this parseCmd helper in place. Let's go ahead and use this inside the create command or the create function. So inside the create function, after checking the minimum number of arguments, let's go ahead and parse this command. I'm simply going to copy this if because I don't want to waste time on this, and I'm simply gonna say something like parseCmd, and I'm going to provide create CMD. And now that we have all of this in place, let's simply go ahead and make the call to the HTTP client. So for the beginning, let's go ahead and fill out this interface with specific methods, which will be dummy methods for now on the HTTP client, but we will fill them out later on. So the first method is create. So let's simply say create, and create is going to receive a couple of arguments. So let's say title and message are going to be strings, and then we have duration, which is going to be a time.duration. And this one is going to get us back a slice of bytes and error. Then we have the edit method, which has everything exactly the same, except it also receives the ID. Edit is going to receive the exact same thing, except it also got the ID. Then we have the fetch method, so I'm simply going to duplicate this, say fetch, and remove all of this. And I'm gonna name this IDs, and it's going to be slice of string. And then we got the delete function, which is basically exactly the same as fetch, except it's not gonna return anything back but error. And then we have another method called healthy, which basically receives a host, and it's going to get us back a boolean. So let's say something like healthy. We're going to receive a host, which is a string, and it's going to give us back a boolean. So let's open up our create command and complete the implementation. So after the call to the parseCmd, I'm simply going to say something like, let's say response and error, and I'm going to call switch.client, and inside client we have something like create, right? So let's simply say t, m, and d. But because those three are pointers, let's make sure we provide the value instead of the pointer. So let's say star, star, and star. So we got this error. Let's make sure we handle this error properly by saying if error is not nil, we want to do something about it. And we're simply going to say something like this. Let's say return wrapError, and let's use a string and return the error, and let's say could not create a reminder. If everything was okay and we got no error, let's log out the response, which in this case is a slice of bytes. Let's remove this one and say font print reminder created successfully, and let's print out the result which we got back from the HTTP client. So let's say colon, and let's use a new line %s, and let's provide in response. And because response is a slice of byte, let's convert it to a string. Let's say string, let's use this response. So we finished with the implementation of the create method or the create command. However, we got an error inside the switch.go file. As you can see, when we try to create the HTTP client, this time it doesn't work, it gives us an error. So if we try to highlight this, it says cannot use HTTP client type HTTP client as type backend HTTP. Basically, this method new HTTP client gives us back an empty HTTP client struct, which doesn't have any methods attached to it. So let's go ahead and quickly fill them up with dummy prints, with dummy implementations, so that we have a valid code so that we can run this and test this out. I'm going to start by creating the first method called create. So let's say func, and let's give it a pointer receiver. Let's say C HTTP client, and let's say create. And according to the interface which we're trying to implement, it receives 3 arguments. So let's say title, message, and these 2 are going to be string. And let's also pass in duration, which is going to be a time.duration. We return back a slice of byte and an error. So let's say res is going to be equal to slice of byte, and let's pass in a string. Let's say response for create reminder, and let's also say return res nil. So basically we have a valid implementation of the create method. So let's just copy paste to not waste a lot of time. Let's say copy this and paste this over, say edit, and we're gonna have exactly the same thing, except we're gonna receive an ID as well this time. So fetch is going to be pretty easy, everything except IDs, and it's going to be a slice of string. Let's say fetch, and let's also update the response bodies by saying in the edit, let's say response for edit a reminder, and here let's say response for, I don't know, fetching reminders, and let's also say delete, and delete is simply going to return back an error, and let's say delete return nil. And we have one more method, which is the healthy. So healthy is simply going to receive host, and host is going to be a string. It's going to return back a bool, and let's say return true. And as you can see, we have these small little green function icons, which means we successfully implemented this interface. Now to finish the command switch, all we have to do is fill up the rest of the functions. So inside the create command, I'm going to go ahead and copy everything, except we're going to have to slightly modify this. So let's copy everything from the create, paste it right here. Let's say edit CMD, and let's pass edit CMD here. In this command, we're only going to need 2 arguments because we need at least one ID, and we need at least something like a title, a message, or a duration. So we need to at least update something in order for this command to run successfully. And here as well in the parseCmd, we need to pass in edit CMD. So here we're going to say could not edit reminder. And in the success message where we print out the result, we should say reminder edited successfully and print out the result as well. And to make this a little bit more beautiful, let's simply say a reminder like this with a lowercase r, and also correct this guy right here to have a little bit of consistency when it comes to logging and all that stuff. We need one more argument, which is the IDs. Now IDs is not something usual like string var or duration var or anything like that. We need to create a custom type to parse a list of IDs and convert that to a slice of string, and then pass that slice of string over to the HTTP client. So to do that, let's go ahead and create that custom type. So let's scroll back to the top of the file, and let's say type idsFlag, for example, and let's make it a slice of string. So first, let's implement the string method. Let's say, for example, func, and let's say list is going to be idsFlag because it's going to be a list. We're going to parse a list of IDs. Let's say string, and string is going to return back a string. So as I was saying, we simply need to join these the list of these values by a comma. So let's simply say return strings.join, for example, and let's say list, and let's join them by a comma. So that's pretty much it on the implementation of the string method. Now let's implement the set method. Let's say copy and paste, and this one is going to be set. This one is going to be a pointer because we want to override the value of the specific list, of the specific slice of string. And this one is going to receive a string from the command line. So instead of providing nothing, we're going to say v or value, and it's going to be a string, and it's going to return back an error. So this implementation is going to be pretty stupid simple. All we have to do is simply append to this list, but consider this is a pointer, so we have to use the star or the value. So let's say list equals to append, and let's say star list, and let's provide in the value. And because it has to return an error, we simply can return nil because there's no fancy check here or validation or anything like that. So we don't want to return any error whatsoever. So let's scroll back down to the edit method. First of all, let's declare a variable of type idsFlag. So let's simply say idsFlag. And then let's declare another flag on this specific command, which is going to be called IDs. So let's say edit cmd.var because this is a custom type. This is a flag.var. that value, so we have to use var. So let's say %IDs. So the name is going to be ID because it's an individual ID, but when we pass multiples of them, we're finally going to append that to a list. So let's provide in the ID, and let's do in parentheses something like int of the reminder to edit. Now all we have to do is simply replace the create call with the edit call, and because this is a list of IDs that we're working with, we have to play with the last element of this ID. So we take the last element of this list in case the user provided multiple IDs. So all we have to do is simply say edit, and edit requires ID. Now let's create something like last ID, IDs of len of IDs -1. So to make this a valid call, let's simply say last ID. So I'm gonna copy everything from the edit command, and I'm gonna paste everything right here, and I don't need these values. However, I do need the IDs, and then let's adjust a couple of things like the command name. Let's say fetch CMD and pass in fetch CMD everywhere that we use edit instead. So let's say fetch here as well. And we don't need last ID. We could simply pass in IDs right here. And instead of edit, let's call fetch because we need a list of IDs and we don't need the rest of these arguments right here. Let's say could not fetch reminders, and let's also adjust the last message by saying reminders fetched successfully and print out the result which we get from the HTTP client. And speaking of the minimum number of arguments, we don't need anything but one. So instead of 2, let's simply say 1. Let's copy everything from the fetch command, paste it right here, and simply do a couple of adjustments. So the first one's gonna be the name of it. So let's say delete CMD, simply replace this everywhere and replace it here, and as well call delete here, and instead of response we simply get just an error, could not delete reminders, successfully deleted records, and let's also say \n %v \n, and let's say IDs, which is the argument which we're passing to the delete command. Also, I see we made a little mistake when it comes to describing the flag when it comes to IDs. So let's update this usage real quick right here. So I'm gonna say something like a list of reminder IDs, and let's do something like int right here, and let's say to delete because we're passing a list as opposed to passing one individual ID. So let's simply copy this description right here, and let's update the fetch command by saying paste, and let's say to fetch. So right after the delete command, we have the health command. Let's go ahead and fill out the details for this command. So first of all, let's remove this dummy print by declaring a variable saying host is going to be a string. And again, let's create in the flag set. So not to waste a lot of time, I'm simply going to copy and paste this one right here. I'm going to say health CMD dot string var. It's going to require the address of this host variable which just created. Let's say it's going to be named host, and we want to provide something like switch.backend API URL because that is what we get by default. And as a description, we're going to say something like host to ping for health. So after this, I'm going to copy an if statement when it comes to parseCmd. So let's just copy this one from the delete command and let's paste it over here. So let's provide in health command. So I am simply going to say if not, for example, switch.client.healthy, and let's provide in the host. Otherwise, we're going to print something positive. So in the first case, let's print something like the host is down. So let's say fumpt print host %s is down. So let's provide in the host right here real quick. And let's also add in a new line at the end of it. Let's say \n. Let's copy the exact same message and let's say host is up and running. And that was pretty much it on these commands. Now let's go ahead and test these out because we've been writing a lot of code without testing if it works or not. However, before we test things out, I noticed something in the main.go file for the client executable, and that is this print right here. I mean, we say command switch error, and instead of printing an error or printing anything we get there, we print a string. But an error is not necessarily a string, although it has the error method. So let's say %v, and let's also add in a \n. So let's go ahead and give it a try. So again, it's very easy to regenerate the binary. All you have to do is say make client. So let's open up a terminal and say make client. Firstly, let's say bin client, and let's provide in some non-existing command, and it's going to say invalid command, and it's going to print the command which we just printed. So whether you run bin client without any arguments, or you simply provide in the help flag, it's going to output the same exact message. Now let's dive into those commands, into create, edit, fetch, delete, and help. So let's simply say create. As you can see, when you say create, it says 3 arguments are required, but 0 provided. So let's say create, let's say -t, let's say some title, and let's say message equals to some message. And let's also say -d equals to 1 second. And as you can see, we have an error. We have a message, and it says flag provided but not defined message. So I was supposed to say message with SS. My bad. And as you can see, it says reminder created successfully, response for create reminder, which means HTTP client worked perfectly. Let's also run this, but this time let's use the edit command. So let's say edit, and we also need to provide in an ID. So let's say ID equals 1, for example. And there you have it. It says reminded edited successfully. And this time, let's provide in, for example, let's say delete. Let's see if delete works. It says 1 argument required. As you can see, that check also works. So let's say ID equals 1. For example, ID equals 2. As you can see, we have 2 elements which are getting removed. So let's say the exact same example, fetch -ID equals 1, -ID equals 2, for example. And as you can see, it says reminders fetch successfully, response from fetching reminders. Pretty much everything works. Let's also check the health command. So let's simply say health, and it's going to use localhost 8080. So as you can see, guys, everything works when it comes to the command switch itself. So we successfully implemented a command switch by using an elegant approach, a functional approach. Hope you guys like it. Hope you guys understand why I went this route. So speaking of mistakes, I don't want to start the next video with mistakes, with correcting them and all that stuff. I want to start the next video from a clean slate. That's why we're going to correct the mistakes in this video before we wrap this up. So let's open up the project, and let's open up the client directory, and inside client you have switch.go, and inside switch.go you have to look for reminderFlags helper, which we built earlier. However, as you can see at the last of this helper function, we have something like string var, and this duration is not a string var, as I was saying before. So instead of string var, all we have to do is simply say duration var. So let's say duration var, let's copy paste again. So duration var, and let's pass in D here, and also pass in D here. And as you can see, we have an error here because we're supposed to give in a valid default for duration. So let's just say 0, and let's pass in 0 as well. So this is now a valid code. Make sure if you copy paste, you address things, you correct things, and adjust things around. So that was pretty much it on the part 2 of this video. Hopefully you liked it. Hopefully you find a lot of value out of it. So if you did find value out of this, make sure to like and share this video. It's gonna mean a lot to me. And I'm super sorry that I had to break this up, but this video was very long. It was getting out of hand, and I had to split this up. So that was pretty much it on everything. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.